One review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He's a coach, consultant, philosopher, founder, father, marine mixologist, leadership, and of course, an author and executive coach, no other than Mr. Edward Tyson.
Hello, Daniel.
Welcome, Mr. Edward, and Book 101 review. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I miss?
Sure. Well, of course, my name is Ed Tyson, and I'm a former Marine turned executive, process improvement expert, and then turned consultant, and then author. And after I figured it wasn't enough just to write something down myself, I needed to better support the model I created and introduced in my book. And so now at 50, I'm startup exec.
Yes. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world, Mr. Ed. Thank you. And today, let's talk about where is your leadership? Oh my goodness, I like this topic, Mr. Ed. So, when you think about your most authentic leadership style, where does it feel like it originates from in your body or psyche? Is it a place of calm, of fire, or curiosity?
Well, in fact, I try to focus less on interpersonal skills and style and more on systems. And hence, my whole concept of where is your leadership? Because if it's only in your head and it hasn't come out into the real world, if you haven't defined your process, then you can't improve your process. So we often think about going to classes, engaging in coaching, which I certainly do both of those, train and I coach. And if all we do is nurture our mind and what's inside, all we ever do is increase our potential leadership. Leadership exists in our actions and our behavior. And it's not enough to do it once. We have to do it again and again to both build through repetition, build our strength, but also through that repetition, building trust and capability to not just do simple coordination, but complex coordination well, which can only come from the kind of learning that a team goes through by repeating its processes over and over again.
Mr. Ed, if your leadership were a physical space, a room, a landscape, a type of architecture, what would it look or feel like? And does reveal about the core nature?
Well, I would have to say a triangle. And the only reason is it's got three sides. And I look at the three biggest components of leadership as with the center of that triangle being focused on the purpose of leading, which I think is the cultivation of communities of effort. And since that's the purpose, that yields a three components that really end up being the work of leading, which is if we have to cultivate that community of effort, then we need to structure it, we need to operate it, and we need to perfect it. So it needs to exist. So we need to kind of design it. That's the structure component. And then if we fail to operate it as it's designed, we will never yield the kind of data we need to endlessly perfect or improve it. So I would pick a three-sided object simply because my model at the highest level relies on translating the purpose of leading into the concept of three leadership domains: structuring, operating, and perfecting communities of effort.
From expert to executive, what is all about?
Well, sure. That's the title of my book, From Expert to Executive, Mastering the SOPs of Leading. And of course, I was just referring to what I mean by the SOPs of leading as structure, operate, perfect. Now, of course, Many of you might also think of another definition of SOPs, which is standard operating procedures. And I mean both of those things. So it's a mnemonic double entendre, the SOPs. And that's what I mean when I talk about the SOPs of leading, that leaders must convert the work of leading, which is to structure, operate, and perfect their communities of effort, into the process of leading, which is developing their own standard operating procedures for leading. And in From Expert to Executive, what I talk about is the difficulty of this journey, which every step we take leads us away from our craft. So expertise buys the ticket to this trip, but it is not typically what we are originally gain that expertise in that leads to our jobs as executives. That is, of course, leadership, which requires a person to dip in their toe into a new river. They've spent thousands and thousands of minutes, tens of thousands of dollars, and many years of their career perfecting an expertise that gets them promoted. But then it turns out a new set of skills and new processes are required for success. And that's what my book is about that journey and the difficulty of that journey. It's in fact a fictional story about a biotech company based in Orange County, California. Go figure. That's where I live. And the scientists, the money man behind the biotech company itself, and some of the people that work there, and how they all struggle with the leadership that's required to cultivate the community of effort they need to succeed.
Interesting book, Mr. Ad. Interesting indeed. And how do you translate the messy biological reality of this book?
Well, I think it's through simple concepts that you translate into deeper and deeper levels of meaning. So, quite simply, at the highest level, I'm talking about the SOPs of leading that I mentioned earlier. So, the development of simple standard operating procedures for what? For doing the work of leading, the structuring, the operating, and the perfecting of it. Now, in my book and in my practice, I define 16 more dimensions underneath those three big domains. And so essentially, what I continue to do is break down a very complicated subject into very specific work that we as leaders must do. You mentioned earlier the idea of style and who I am as a leader and how I am. What I would liken that to is that's kind of the icing on the leadership cake. That's the special stuff that I bring to the work. But the very confusing thing about leadership training today is we often focus on those things first. So if you show up for leadership training, rather than help you understand the primary work of leading, doing things like defining the scope, the strategies, culture, objectives, purpose, within an ecosystem that a team has, we start focusing on interpersonal skills and style. Now, this would be akin to showing up on the soccer field to play soccer or football for the rest of the world, and someone giving you a class on sportsmanship, how you ought to be on the field, versus telling you how do you score, what's the work of the position, how do you do it well, etc. So we're that confusing. So I try to break it down first at a very high level, that structure, operate, perfect, and then into a more detailed area where we start talking about things like examining the ecosystem, understanding your purpose and how to add value in that ecosystem, developing objectives, looking at the cultural, not just the business objectives, and then of course crafting winning strategies. So that would just be an example of 5 of the dimensions that rest under the structure domain. And of course, the challenge for every leader is to figure out their process for doing those things. How do I establish the scope? How do I do that? Who do I do it with? And when do I do it? And that's kind of the SOP component where our own interpersonal skills start to mesh with the basic work of leading. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I've been talking about this stuff for several years, but doing it without a substantial tool that can help leaders answer the question, where is my leadership? And that's why I've spent the last 2 years with my partner developing the Leadership SOPs app, which effectively allows a leader to define, either using AI, their own experience, our or a coach, or their own experience, to define their SOPs and then activate and manage them. So really, we're trying to allow a leader to say, here's my playbook, and that compiles the core of my leadership, and then allow that system to prompt and manage the actions they need to take to be successful by team.
Your book titles reframes leadership as a set of standard operating procedures. Why did you choose that specific operational metaphor over a more philosophical approach to leadership?
Well, because frankly, I feel like people get lost in all that philosophy. They get lost in the skills and the style equation. We should be far more behavioral so that people can lay the foundational groundwork, the repetitive processes they need to engage in to do that work, so that with each rep, just like in the gym, right? Each repetition is building that muscle, and that gives a place for our skills and style to rest, so that when I try to, for instance, do strategic alignment annually, perhaps, and now I have a process by which I do that. Did I get the right results? Was the team engaged? Did all the right people get engaged? Did our strategy reach our objectives? Did we realize our purpose? Did we do all that within the right cultural parameters? Then, if the answer is no, I can say, well, was it the problem with my process, or was the problem with my interpersonal skills and style? Did I disenfranchise people through the process? But we can't do process improvement if we don't define and then execute the process itself. And so that's why I chose the SOP's moniker, standard operating procedures. That, and probably the fact that I am a former Marine who is also a healthcare executive. And if you're either of those two things out there listening, you know that we love our acronyms. So I was definitely going to find one or two there to help provide a good synopsis for my approach.
A good synopsis indeed. So, you talk about mastering the SOPs of leading. How do these differ fundamentally from the SOPs of doing that made someone an expert in the first place?
Great question. And some of my approach is to try to break this down so that it's not a mystery, so that we realize that a lot of the lessons we learned in mastering any expertise. So I work daily with scientists, lawyers, accountants, and they have mastered their fields through developing consistent approaches to things, sticking with those approaches until they need to be evolved and improved, and breaking down the subject matter into smaller and smaller pieces, and then reassembling it as a cohesive whole. And so, what I'm trying definitely to do on the leadership front is say, this isn't as complicated as we sometimes make it sound. It is far more approachable, leverages clear science and rules of common thinking and common knowledge in order to be mastered as well.
What is the most dangerous expert mindset habit that high performers must unlearn first to succeed as executives?
Well, I think the biggest piece is a lot of that, everything you just talked about being expert. is wrapped around also being right and knowing the answer and focusing on that and focusing on the objective. And the slipperiest concept about leadership is that while we cannot turn our gaze from the objective we are trying to achieve, we also must, and we must turn that gaze to the team we have to develop, because leadership is fundamentally about creating the capacity to do together what we could not do alone. If I can do it alone, I don't need leadership. I need leadership because I cannot do it alone. And so I must deploy this process of social organization that we call leadership. And what that means is my number one objective has to be the cultivation of that capacity, the cultivation of the community of effort. It can't be all about the objective. And when we are simply being experts, it's about being right, it's about the objective, it's about controlling that functional expertise and presiding over it. Leadership is not about those things. Leadership is about structuring, operating, and perfecting a substantially strong community of effort, willing, capable, and sustainable. Because if it is not willing, then you're not leadership. You're not doing leadership. You're not leading. That's called a dictatorship. It's called slavery. It's called a bunch of nasty words in the English language. So they have to be willing. And then if they're not also capable, you're just running them into a wall. And then lastly, they won't maintain that willingness or that capability if the whole system is not sustainable. So a leader must be focused on creating this capacity, a willing, capable, and sustainable community of effort that can rise to the challenges before it.
Mr. Ad, what are your short-term and long-term goals?
Well, short term is we have launched the Leadership SOPs app in both major mobile app stores in early access. So for now, it's free. So my very short-term goal is to finalize all the components with the great feedback we're getting from the hundreds of leaders that have joined us on the Leadership SOPs app, and convert that into a real business that adds value instead of to hundreds as we're doing in early access, being relatively quiet about our presence there, these kinds of events aside, and then being able to reach tens of thousands. And my long-term goal is to turn that into an enterprise SaaS application that can help organizations, not just individual leaders or coaches and trainers, improve leadership, but help organizations really see and drive leadership behavior at scale.
Good luck to you goals, Mr. Ad, and looking forward for more success. And what will be your piece of advice for those people out there who want to be like you?
Well, I don't know who those people might be, but for those who really want to take the first step on the journey from expert to executive, it would be get comfortable with the idea that this path leads away from your craft and to a new one. It leads to leadership.
Well, thank you for that advice. And can you please recommend a book of books that influence you, Johnny?
Well, sure. I would say number one book that influenced my leadership journey is Leadership in the New Science by Margaret Wheatley.
Thank you for that recommended book, Mr. Ad. But before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, my other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in third season, and my book 101 review in its sixth season, comedy 101 in third season, geography 101, love letters, music 101, science 101 in its third season, and of course my food 101 in sixth season as well, and sex 101 Science 101 and third season of my baby podcast Trivia 101, Mental Health 101, Motivation 101, Entrepreneurship 101, and of course my Bible verses 101. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Mr. Ed, if a reader could only internalize one SOP from the book to have the greatest immediate impact, would you recommend and why?
I would definitely say devising a mechanism for scope alignment. How do you look at your uh, ecosystem, understand the value you must put into that ecosystem, i.e., your purpose, devise your objectives, determine the culture, and then craft the winning strategies to live that culture, achieve those objectives, and be your purpose.
Be your purpose, people. And Mr. Ad, can you please invite our listeners to support your book, your advocacy, or your business, or whatever projects that you're doing right now?
Yes, please grab a copy of the book on Amazon, From Expert to Executive, Mastering the SOPs of Leading. Check us out in either of the major mobile app stores, Leadership SOPs with an S dot app. And of course, find, follow, and engage with me on LinkedIn as my social media of choice. And I'll also be looking for you on our platform, the Leadership SOPs app.
One more question, Mr. Ad, before I'll let you go. The journey from expert to executive is a major identity shift. Ultimately, what is the most important thing a leader must become that no SOP alone can teach?
Hmm. Well, I would have to say humble. We really need to wrap our heads around the fact that the purpose of leadership is not to provide solutions, to provide the direction, to provide the answers, to preside over the expertise that got you the ticket. The purpose of leadership is to cultivate a community of effort sufficient to meet the challenges you face.
Yes, people, humility, not arrogance. Mr. Ad, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate the time, Daniel.
Maricon people, see you soon.